Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Krober, and today we are not going to talk about riots or political turmoil or COVID. No, 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 no. Today we have a wonderful subject, the Earth energies. I have Maria Wheatley with me here. Her website is mariawheatley.com. She also has an esoteric college. She does tours for tourists to megalithic sites, which are also very interesting. And now, Maria, welcome.
Hi, well, thanks for having me, Judith. It's lovely to join you here today.
So, I understand you learned the art of dowsing from your father.
That's right. Well, first of all, I really did love ancient sites from a very young age, and I loved history. And yes, my late father taught me how to dowse. He inherited all the unpublished surveys and manuscripts of a master dowser called Guy Underwood. So he was looking into what's called the geodetic system of earth energies, as well as things like ley lines and earth currents. So it gave me a very broad understanding of earth energies from quite a young age. And I've gone on to make some of my own discoveries with earth energies and with the ancestors within the ceremonial landscape.
Mm-hmm. And so when we hear dowsing, many people probably will think water, finding water, but there's much more to that, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Most people automatically associate it with water divining or water witching, as it's called in the USA. But dowsing can lead us to understand far more about Gaia, the earth upon which we live. Because Gaia has invisible energies, which are generically called earth energies, some of which are very good for us and beneficial, and they can boost our energy levels. Some can calm us down. And other earth energies can be toxic because, just like you and I, Gaia needs to release some forms of negative energy. And these can be in the guise of underground yang water, which long-term, if you live above yang water, that's groundwater that flows in the ground for, over 5 years, it can lead to health problems. And like the crossing points of Curry grid lines, that's another detrimental point, as are Benker grid lines. But then you get other much more beneficial energies. So by understanding the where where we live and understanding the where of an ancient site, we become ever closer to understanding Gaia and her earth energies. So dowsing can certainly easily find all different forms of earth energies, and there are lots of different forms of earth energy.
Mm-hmm. And how do you go about that, determining if that is bad energy or good energy?
Well, with the geodetic system of earth energies, positive earth energy, such as what's called the geospiral pattern, is the harmonic surface pattern. That's what dowsers rods react to, is the harmonic surface pattern of very, very, very deep water that's born within Gaia and independent of rainfall. It used to be called primary water, and I really wanted to feminize it again, so I called it yin water. And that's very harmonic. So we recognize that by the pattern it emits. Whereas rainfall water that falls from the sky and fills up the underground streams and aquifers, that gives a wavy pattern of like 3 lines going through the landscape, your traditional symbol of like Aquarius, the water bearer in astrological terms. So I would recognize the two by the energy patterns they emit. Or you could ask your dowsing rod, but by getting to know the patterns that Gaia emits, you're beginning to understand the forms of energies. And that can lead you to understanding. And then if you go deeper still, the color frequency that is associated with geospirals and all the different types of earth energies, that can lead to a deeper understanding of what the energies are likely to manifest in a given area.
Okay. When you said the earth energies and that it follows patterns. Are you talking about ley lines?
No, ley lines are completely different. They're
Okay.
long and straight. A ley line can be just a couple of miles long, or it can be 300 miles long, or it can be a great circle that goes around the globe and can connect to other ley systems, creating a bit like a grid, if you will. They're ley lines. The energy travels too fast along a straight line. The ancient Chinese informed of this millennia ago. And that's why they have bowed roofs, so that the chi energy flows gracefully. So where you have a ley, or a ley line is commonly called, then the energy is traveling very fast along that line. So when we come to the more spiral and circular patterns that Gaia emits, they are not ley lines, they are not ley energy, they're earth energy pure, and they tend to be more harmonic and calm, and they give a soothing element to the environment. And that's why our ancient ancestors looked for these particular types of energies and made them into central features at stone circles, such as the altar stone at Stonehenge or the cove stones at Avebury. But leys just simply link the monuments to each other. Yep. They're not necessarily the power in the land. When you look at a ley system, which is a ley line that has a male and female earth currents entwine in it, a bit like a caduceus symbol, it's the earth currents that are more powerful in a way, and the ley kind of anchors those two energies together. So if we visualize the caduceus symbol, the straight bit is the ley, and the serpents that entwine the caduceus are the earth currents. That's very powerful, far, far more powerful than just a ley.
Mm-hmm. And what can you do with that? If you, let's say you found something like that, and how is that beneficial? What can you do with that?
Right, okay, so at places like Avebury and Stonehenge, you're going to get very wide earth currents. They're going to be very, very wide. But they interlace the planets, so you may have a female or a male current in your garden or backyard, or even in your home. So we can work with these earth energies on two levels. If we see the male serpent force to be solar and the female serpent force to be lunar, then the male energies, the male earth currents, they tend to be rejuvenizing, give us strength, courage. So they're really good to, if you've had an illness, to recuperate upon. Whereas the female, more lunar type of earth current, she's more intuitive, nurturing. So they're good places to meditate upon. So one will be more calming and one will be more stimulating. So the male earth currents are stimulating physically in the body, whereas the female currents are kind of more reflective, contemplative, meditative. So that's just two quick examples of how you could work with those two earth currents. And I teach with my esotericcollege.com how to dowse a little pussycat there, how to easily find these in your own home. And I'm starting an online course in August, so it's really an easy art to learn. And with small group sessions, which is what I focus on Zoom or Skype, whatever media platform, we can really galvanize people to get out there and have a look and decode the homes that they live in. For example, in my garden, I have a female earth current flowing through. She's not very wide. It's not going to be like the ones you get at Avebury and Stonehenge, make no mistake. But nonetheless, they're very powerful. So she's about 2 foot wide, and I've got a really nice area, a stone on there and a seat for when I feel that I want calm and maybe I've been working on the PC or laptop. I can go into the garden and relax. And that energy field we have measured above the harmonic energy patterns, and they put your brain into around about 7 to 10 hertz. And 7 hertz is our alpha mode. It makes us feel relaxed. So these energy fields, these Hertzian energy fields that we have measured above the energy currents, we know that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
It's not guesswork, you know, we know that through research.
Okay. So about your tours, because recently I interviewed Mohammed Ibrahim in Egypt, and
Mhm.
he, of course, is a guide in Egypt, but he, because of the corona situation, he cannot do tours. Are you able to do tours right now, or is that on hold as well?
That is on hold. I mean, it's not just Egypt. I mean, Malta doesn't want Brits to travel to Malta. The USA has stipulated that they don't want Brits traveling to the USA either. So even if I wanted to go to those places, because I'm doing tours next year to Malta, my own tour, Earth Energy Perspective, where we interact with the Earth energies, a lot of feminine power energies there, and also with Brian Forrest and Patricia Arion. But yeah, it is all on hold. And plus, at Avebury, I live not far from Avebury Henge, which is the world's largest stone circle, and I do a lot of tours there. The villagers, the businesses might want tourists there, but at the moment, the villagers don't really. So I'm in support of the villagers, really, and there has been a death of COVID at Avebury.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What would you tell people that say, that is all woo-woo stuff. That is not really what science tells us, what she's talking about. That is not scientific.
Well, I would say it is scientific actually, because we've used electrostatic recording equipment, we've used Hertzian field equipment to ascertain whether a female earth current that somebody else discovered back in the 1980s was true or not. I'm a research author and I would go with the truth, no matter where that truth will take me. So we got some very sensitive copper probes. We made a control area outside of the earth current. And then upon the earth current, we placed in very deep copper probes and we got the electromagnetic energy signal that was present on the earth current that was not present on the control sites. So that says with scientific instrumentation that there was 3 anomalous electromagnetic signals flowing through that female earth current. In another instance that we've done recordings at a place called the Sanctuary, which is quite close to Avebury Henge, it was called the Head of the Serpent by Dr. William Stukely in 1724. And today it's just marked by concrete markers. All of the stones were demolished in 1724. It was a beautiful stone circle, a concentric stone circle, and it was rediscovered in the 1930s by a female archaeologist, one of the first female archaeologists, called Maud Cunnington. And she put where she found the stone hole, she put a marker. Well, we took some radiation Geiger counter levels at that stone circle, the remnants of that stone circle, and at the center we had higher radiation levels. You took the Geiger counter, and it was a sophisticated Geiger counter, not one you could get on eBay for a couple of £100. These were sophisticated, devices. And when we took recordings just outside of the marker stone, it dipped back down to the normal radiation levels. So that tells us that the ancients may have been aware that you get different radiation levels at ancient sites, and small amounts of radiation can be beneficial. Obviously long term it's not. So we've done extensive tests. We also took the electrostatic field measurements on the top of Silbury Hill, which is the largest man-made mound in northwest Europe, situated about a mile south of Avebury Henge, a gigantic mound with no burial has ever been found within it. It's a huge mound, and the electrostatic field on the top of Silbury Hill was 1,000 times greater than on the bottom of Silbury Hill and in our control areas. So we know that there's a huge electrostatic field being emitted from the top of that mound. The instrumentation does not lie. And I've also done tests on megaliths because dowsers say that, you get a particular energy emission on a particular point on a standing stone that's rooted into earth energy or a ley line. We did tests there. I doused them first and said, this is where it is. Then the equipment came in and it was 99.9% accurate that on those energy points that I doused, the energy was being released, electromagnetic energy. So that's science backing up the claims I have about earth energies. I try to be really left, right brain, because I don't expect people to believe me. You know, why should people have a belief system? You know, I'm not into that at all. I want to say to people, this is the science behind dowsing and behind earth energies.
Okay. I watched one of your videos where you explained that at the equator, the earth bulges out. And I'm just asking this because it is a hot topic and highly disputed. And I was wondering, would your work, would that even work on a flat earth not symbol, on a flat earth model?
To be honest, I haven't looked into that, so I don't think I could be qualified to answer that, because I've never thought of that, you know, and I've never worked with anybody to do the earth energies with that, because the Druids of old in the Iron Age, that's from 750 BC up into the Roman invasion here in England in 43 AD, they recorded that there was 12 great circles that went round the world. And if you take a ley line and then you wrap it around the globe, it will become a circle. So if we look to ancient texts, that's what they were saying, recorded by Caesar. We never wrote our history down as Celtic Druids. It was the Romans that unfortunately, you know, wrote a lot down, and they were very biased to the ancient British people and culture. So, so I would have to look into that.
Okay, that was just a thought that just crossed my mind, and I particularly do not care about it either, because it doesn't solve any problem. Have you also looked into crop circles?
I don't really investigate crop circles in this area. My main forte is stone circles worldwide and the Egyptian pyramids, temples in Malta. And recently, last year, I reconnected with some ancient sites of the Americas built by the ancient Anasazi people. So my focus is that. But I do live in Wiltshire, and there are crop circles. We know categorically some are man-made. That is for sure, and that is undeniable and indisputable. And then there's some people that say there are some that are genuine. My sadness about the crop circles is Monsanto. I mean, the local farmers were pleading on the local television, saying that they don't want to use Roundup anymore. They know that it's killing off the insects, and it's not one Roundup. They're using about 7. So anybody that goes into a crop circle, you're just being surrounded by Monsanto Roundup. So I say take sanitization in there with you. Try not to put the corn against your skin, because we've noticed with sensitive dogs, that when they go into fields of crop, not necessarily a crop circle, but fields of crop, and that they run, they can get runny eyes and people can get itchy skin. So, so I think, you know, it's an industrial farmland, Wiltshire. It isn't a natural habitat anymore. It's really, the corn is grown for money, money, money.
Yeah. What is your idea what Stonehenge was really all about? I guess that is the most famous one, although Avebury is, I would say, interesting, highly interesting as well. But what is your feeling? What Stonehenge was all about?
Well, it depends which part of Stonehenge, because Stonehenge is in a much wider environ as well. It's not just an isolated monument. And you had Stonehenge phase 1. Now, Stonehenge phase 1, 5,000 years ago in 3100 BC, if we're to believe the Orthodox time dating, and that is an Orthodox time dating. Personally, I feel they're a bit older, okay, but we're staying within the grounds of accepted dating systems. Then Stonehenge was a massive circle that had 56 blue stones going around, creating a very large circle, surrounded by a ditch and a bank of gleaming white chalk, which was about 6 feet high. So you can see the stones. It was a very secretive place within a Henge monument. And then in the 1960s, you had Gerald Hawkins, who said he cracked the enigma of Stonehenge Phase 1, which was used to calculate eclipses. Categorically, it is. If you, look at the heel stone, which was part of Phase 1, which is world famous now for the sunrise at midsummer, which is a bit of a misnomer because it's true alignment before the avenue was widened to make the heel stone nearly in alignment with the sun. It was most accurately aligned to the moon's mid-swing position in its metonic cycle. And Gerald Hawkins calculated that the eclipsed moon closest to midwinter would rise above the heel stone blood red. Yeah, and then you could calculate lots and lots of eclipses. Why would the ancients want to know about eclipses? Historically, people have been fearful about eclipses, but in terms of Earth energy, back in 1999, when there was a total eclipse in England, which is rare to have a total eclipse in England, myself and many other dowsers, as part of a wider research team, realized that at that time of an eclipse, the Earth energy's cut out. It's like they go quiet, you can't find them. And then a while later, they reboot back up. So if you're using Stonehenge as an energy system to produce energy, you'd want to know when there's going to be a power cut, for example. The other guise of Stonehenge Phase 2, which is the Stonehenge that we're all familiar with the linteled, 30 linteled outer circle. Then you had an inner blue stone circle, then a horseshoe of trilithons, and the holiest of holy, the altar stone. That's the Stonehenge that we're familiar with. Well, I think one stone in there was particularly healing, because it has a spine going down it where it's recumbrant now, meaning it's fallen down. But when it was an upright like that, if you put your spine against that spine of the stone sticking out, then I think that was very, very healing. Today, even though it's recumbrant, I've got people to put their hands above it because you're not allowed to touch the stones at Stonehenge. And you can even feel heat today being emitted from the spine stone. So I think that was like a realignment, quite a healing stone at Stonehenge. You've got immense vortex energy as well at Stonehenge. You have a geospiral, you have numerous lays, you have earth currents. At one site, you don't just get one thing. It's a misconception, people thinking it's just got a ley line going through it. Well, that's only part of the picture. It's got much, much more. And depending where you are in a monument and what earth energy you're above is how you would use that. Do you see what I mean? So you've got different areas within a stone circle. So I think Stonehenge was partly to do with healing. When we looked at archaeological evidence for that in the surrounding ceremonial landscape, just in front of Stonehenge, you have what's called the cursus, barrows. You used to have a 2-mile long rectangular feature of an earthwork that was like chalk, but that got ploughed out. But from one of those barrows, it was noticed that there was what people called a trepanned skull. That means a skull that's had a hole drilled in it in prehistoric times. That was recently re-evaluated by the curator at Devizes Museum in Wiltshire, and it was more than likely now going to be brain surgery, not just a simple trepanning. Okay, people label these things and say, oh, every skull that has a hole in it has to be trepanned, and it had to be for this and it had to be for that. So I think if we reevaluate what's going on, I think Stonehenge was seen as the Lord's, the healing environment, because you had people coming from Germany to be healed. The Amesbury archer, his oxygen isotopes of his teeth, he wasn't local. Yeah, he traveled across Europe to be there, and he had a bad knee. Then we find glass beads from Egypt. The Egyptians were coming to Stonehenge. And I think it was more than just a solar observatory or a lunar observatory. I think ancient sites like Stonehenge are multifaceted. They're not one thing. They're multifunctional. So yes, they will be a solar observatory. Yes, there'll be an eclipse predictor. Yes, you can time the moon's metonic cycle at Stonehenge categorically. And yes, you can have healing environs there.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that these sites, Avebury, Stonehenge, and that they are all connected?
Well, I think they're connected energetically, but they're very different independently.
Mm-hmm.
So if you went to an environ like Stonehenge, there's nothing like that in the world. That is a very unusual stone circle to have lintels upon it. When you go to a site like Avebury or Rollright or Castlerig or Swinside stone circles, or even in the Orkney, the Ring of Brodgar, the Stones of Stonehenge, there's 900 surviving stone circles in the British Isles alone. Yeah. And half of them have gone. So you'd be talking probably about 2,000-3,000 of these sites. And the smaller ones are from the later Bronze Age. They're not the huge Aveburys. That's a more Neolithic, early Bronze Age. When people wanted my stone circle, their family stone circle, they made smaller ones. So you have to know the timeline to interpret a stone circle. So when you look at a site like Avebury, Avebury took 1,000 years to be developed. It's what's called a composite site. It's not, people go there like tourists and think, oh, it was all made all at once. This is what it looked like. No, it didn't. If you go back to Avebury 5,000 years ago, there were just a few stone settings. You go back there 4,500 years ago, you'd see a big stone circle and 2 stone circles. Go back 4,000 years ago, and then you'd see the avenues added to it. So it was developed over a period of time. It's not, and then another mistake people make, they think West Kennet Long Barrow is the same date as Avebury, is the same date as this and that. They're not. They're different cultures separated by up to 1,000 years. So they're very, when we look at the ceremonial landscape, you need to see it through a timeline, yeah, and not everything all at once.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I heard you talk about sending signals, and that you called it something like Neolithic Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's one of our tests done at Avebury Henge, of which I became quite well known for, because I wanted to prove, like I said earlier, that the stones emit energy bands from particular points in that stone. And Rodney Hale, who did those tests, I mean, he had the equipment. I dowsed them. It was Rodney Hale that decoded them and analyzed them through the statistical t-test to make sure that was in all probability. Well, what's going on really with the standing stone in ancient technology is the ancients, the Neolithic especially, which had long skulls and not necessarily round skulls like us, which I discovered in the Stonehenge environs, it's a bit like an acupuncture needle. If you imagine you've got a meridian line, but we're going to call that meridian line an earth current, a ley line, a grid line, a genesis ley, whatever, earth energy. And then you place that needle on that meridian line. What's happening at a stone circle is absorbing the earth energy through its crystal lattice makeup, because as my late father pointed out, there's no difference between a semiconductor made in Silicon Valley and the lattice structure to the stones of Avebury and Stonehenge. So he called one a macro chip, a standing stone, and the microchip from Silicon Valley. So the stone absorbs the earth energy, then begins to transmit it from one stone to another, to another, to another. And that can go on for miles if they're in alignment. So that's transmitting energy across the landscape without wires. Therefore, I've likened it to Neolithic Wi-Fi. And we've got the signals for that. We've, like I said, Rodney recorded that electromagnetic frequency. So we know that exists on a scientific level, rather than me asking you to believe in me to that.
Mm-hmm. Is that also what Nikola Tesla tapped into?
Well, I think, I mean, he was of a brilliant mind, you know, absolutely a phenomenal, as we know, way ahead of his time. And he should have been the one that gave us the electricity we use today. But I think, yes, I think there is an immense force in the earth. In fact, when the early phone systems came in, I mean, we don't even think about early phone systems now. We take everything for granted, you know, you've got a smartphone. But what was noticed that on the old-fashioned wires that used to carry, you know, the telephone signals, and some places still have that system, that every now and again you get what's called a parasitic earth current flowing through it, making a bit of a nuisance of itself, because it would go all fuzzy, you know. And then they realized that this parasitic current was what they called a parasitic current. I'd call it an earth current and give it some glory. But they found that it was on a cycle going, for example, 10 seconds one way, 10 seconds the other way, 20 seconds one way, 20 seconds the other way. And what we've noticed at stone circles like Rollright, you have particular standing stones, and if you hold a pendulum above them, they will start doing cycles of 10 seconds this way, 10 seconds that. Just like what the early telephone engineers were discovering in the land. And I think our ancient ancestors tapped into that, maybe on a different level than Nikola Tesla, for example, but I think they were tapping into that free energy source that's emitted by Gaia. So I think there's a long lost technology that we need to rediscover in terms of earth energies.
Yeah. I sometimes wonder what our world would look like if, you know, we had gone down that road of Nikola Tesla.
Well, I'm sure you'd have less pollution, a better environment. I mean, the list could go on, the knock-on effect of everything. We may even be using safe mobile phones instead of making what we call e-smog, electromagnetic smog, which is going to be the bane of humanity in the future. And most people that are awake and aware would cower at the thought of 5G entering the scene, but then we all have a smartphone. And I think if we'd used a different energy system to begin with, then maybe we'd have a more healthier smartphone. It could be one interpretation.
Yeah, I have no cell phone at all, but okay.
Well done, you.
I'm the minority, I know that.
Oh, well done.
Do you have a favorite site in England?
I have favorite sites, I suppose, because, you know, each stone circle has similar earth energies, but they do a different function in a way. So some of my favorite stone circles are for sure Stonehenge. I'm just saddened by the way it's managed. And to be frank, as you know, an English person that brings people over for energy tours and things, it's embarrassing having to say we got 30 people private access. It could be managed completely differently. It's just a cash cow. Yeah, that's what Stonehenge is, unfortunately. So I love Stonehenge, and I really like Avebury. I like the stones near Somerset, in Somerset rather, called Stanton Drew, because they're all feminine. You've got the stone circle of Venus, you've got the stone circle of the Earth, and you've got the stone circle of the Moon. So it's very, very feminine. Then I really like the most complete stone circle in England, which is completely different now to Avebury and Stonehenge, because we must realise they're reconstructed. If you saw, when I show people a before and after of the southern inner circle, they go, you're joking. One stone, two stones the far end. That's all there was there. Alexander Keeler re-erected that in the 1930s and set them most in concrete. And if you've got a really good discerning eye at Avebury, you can see some of them are glued together. literally with cement because they were smashed apart. So if we go to Swinside, which is in Cumbria, you have the most complete stone circle. It's hardly ruinous. Why? It's not in an arable land. It's not by a village that where you would want to take the stones for building material, like at Stonehenge and Avebury. And then you're in a stone circle proper. And then you really do feel its energy because it's undisturbed. It's more like what the Neolithic and the Bronze Age people erected 4,500 years ago, rather than going to something that's reconstructed. So so Swinside has to be one of my favorites because it's pure and it's ancient and it hasn't been tampered with by modern man.
When you went to Egypt, were there findings that you encountered that surprised you?
Yes, I mean it certainly was in a way, because, for example, at the Osiris, which is behind Abydos and probably predates Abydos, I think most people that have an alternative mind agree upon that. It was an engineering feat because they placed the stones of the channel, because it was like an island in a way. You had a bit in the rectangular bit surrounded by a rectangular channel of water, and that went into the water table, and it was an artesian spring. That's water under pressure. And when you've got water under pressure, it changes its chemical property into quite a pure water, and it had this massive geospiral, and then lots of streams coming off, creating a very beautiful pattern with a huge solar ley going right the way down through Abydos, through one of the sections dedicated to the sun god. So they were aligning the solar lines more like to Ra, and the lunar lines very much to Isis, Hathor, you know, the kind of more feminine deity or force of nature. So I really liked the way they were matching things up. And what I really found extraordinary about Egypt, because bear in mind, I'd been kind of dowsing systems, ley line systems since the 1980s, when Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst discovered those male and female currents entwined in the ley line, like a caduceus symbol I suggested earlier was a good visual for that. Well, I thought, well, I expect Egypt might have one, you know, and I'm very open-minded. And so I started dowsing and interacting with the energies, because I know how energies feel now I do. And then I thought, there's three earth currents associated to this main ley. That hasn't been heard of. Mm-hmm. Because normally it's two, male and female. And then I realized one was male, normal strength, so to speak, and the female seemed quite similar, although different, to the female earth currents I have dowsed in England. And then it was almost like there was a more gentler one. So I thought that it could have been like a triplicity of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, creating this kind of energetic system that hits some of the temples of the New and Middle Kingdom past Luxor on the Nile, and also they're found not that far from the Valley of the Kings. Mm. So that was a major discovery, that the ley line systems don't necessarily have to have just two.
Mm. Yeah. Did you find similar things in Malta?
In Malta, it's very feminine, because it's all about the goddess temples. And so what I found at Malta was an amazing vortex energy that is, in dowsing terms, you have, spiritually speaking, you have two different types of vortex: an evolution one that will help you grow and expand, and an involution one that will help you really expand spiritually. And they have that at some temple spaces in Malta. And what I also found there was you often get a male ley sort of impregnating the feminine temple, like for fertility rites or something like along those lines. But importantly, when we think about the people of ancient Malta, then they too, identical to Stonehenge, identical to King Tut, you know, and how some of the long skull people are portrayed at Luxor and elsewhere besides, then they have the similar long skulls. So when I got the only published picture of a Maltese long skulled person, which was in the 1930s National Geographical magazine, and put it by the one that I discovered from Stonehenge, they were very, very similar. So I think the long-skulled Neolithic people were the ones responsible for finding the location of most of the sites, because it was the long-skulled Neolithic people that put the first stone settings at Avebury, that erected the first phase of Stonehenge, that erected the first phase of Arborough, the Stonehenge of the north of England. So I think that it was the long-skulled people that really were highly sensitive to the land. And Malta and Stonehenge, there's hardly any difference, although the Heritage Malta denies the fact that they had or found any long skulls, despite a report in the National Geographical magazine that said they found 10.
Mm-hmm. So when I look at the fact that we have pyramids all over the place, on every continent, and obviously the ancients were aware of high energy places. Was there a society that is completely forgotten, that has been erased from our so-called history? I guess that has to be rewritten anyhow, but that, you know, we didn't fall out of the caves and then had the idea, oh yeah, let's build pyramids. That doesn't make sense to me.
Mm.
So,
well, yeah, I mean, I think they do have one thing in common, ancient sites. They are built above an aquifer of groundwater normally, but then a much, much, much deeper yin water aquifer. And that's what emits the electromagnetic signal. Far, far stronger than a male aquifer. So I think, yeah, the pyramids around the world were, and other sites besides, were a testimony to a long lost civilization that knew the art of placement. They knew where two aquifers met. Now, where you get two aquifers boarding, and they could be at a different level, do you see what I mean? You don't have to have like that, you know, they don't have to come together, because you've got rock and clay separating aquifers, as any water diviner would tell you. But when you get that two aquifers coming together, you have a high level of electromagnetic energy. That is a known geological fact. Yeah. So when you look at the art of placement of the pyramids and other monuments beside, you always get that. So it was the electromagnetic field that is a real strong contender of how those monuments were being used. And with a place like, you know, the Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, I mean, you don't go into Giza and come out the same. for one, you know, you enter these places and you are in an altered state of consciousness. And I say that to people: if you go into Stonehenge correctly through the right entrance and not through how the security guards point you to go into Stonehenge, and likewise for, you know, the King's Chamber, etc., then you enter an energy field that will change your consciousness. So you can go into an ancient site and you can come out slightly different in some way, shape or form. And at one of the temples, Komombo in Egypt, I had a massive Kundalini rising experience. Massive. Yeah. And I couldn't even speak the next day. I didn't even go out the cabin because it was just a massive experience of this conscious raising, energetic experience. So I think they can take us to a much, much higher level of consciousness than previously before we go in there. A bit like a before and an after of a makeover. This is the before, this is you after. That's how these ancient sites can change our consciousness. So again, we're looking at things on different levels all of the time. They're not just one thing, like I said earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did that happen, that we lost all that knowledge?
What happened was in England, as an example, because each country will have its own histories, because of the geology of place. For example, in England, what happened is you had this amazing culture that was erecting incredible monuments, such as Stonehenge. And then what's been noticed with DNA studies coming out of Oxford, then you had an influx of what's called the beaker culture. Now, the Neolithic culture was a culture of we. So in there, they buried themselves together. You didn't have a separate grave saying, here lies such and such. It was collective. Their communal longhouses seem to have been collective about the we. Now, when it came to the beaker in culture coming in 2500 BC, and they brought illness and disease, and it probably killed a lot of the ancient British people off, many of whom had long skulls. Their culture was different. Instead of wanting to build communal long barrows and communal places, it became the I, the ego. So they built big round barrows for one person, a primary burial, with rich grave goods like gold and amber and shale that they had imported, and jade axes, and it was about a wealth culture. Then what they did in the Bronze Age, they divided the land up and said, this is mine, whereas before it was ours. So by the time of the end of the Bronze Age, the late Bronze Age going into the early Iron Age, you had a society that was not looking after itself, it was looking after number one. And it was dividing the land up and saying, this is mine, this is this. And we still have that today. I mean, I have my house, my garden, but it was very different in the Neolithic. They had no land division. They were basically a community that was working with one another, not for the egocentric. And that's what happened. And it went from a beautiful goddess culture, lunar culture, because Stonehenge phase 1, like I said earlier, the heel stone, most accurately, any archaeoastronomer will tell you this, a New Ager wouldn't probably, but any archaeoastronomer would tell you the most accurate alignment is the mid-swing position of the moon's metonic cycle above the heel stone, accurate to the degree. It's 2 degrees out, the solar one. So in the Neolithic, people were worshipping the goddess. Women were probably high ranking. You've got more women buried in the Aubrey holes at Stonehenge than you have men. That's a little known fact about Stonehenge. And then in the Bronze Age, you had a male-dominated matriarchal culture coming in that was solar-orientated. And that's why all the stone circles shifted slightly. Let's forget about the moon. Let's forget about the goddess. Let's forget about the femininity of the world. Let's go for solar, male orientation. And so I think the cultures changed quite a bit, and there's a lot of evidence in the landscape for that because of the barrows. They were done for single interments. That was unheard of in the British Isles up until 2000 BC.
So did I understand correctly that these elongated skulls were the earlier society?
Yeah, they were Neolithic. They were the Neolithic ancient Britons, and probably had very dark Mediterranean skin. That's what's being mooted at Oxford, and blue eyes. So they would have been quite stunning looking. And in my research of the elongated skulls, they could have looked quite mythical. By that, I mean, because they've got a longer skull, their ear seemed offset to the back and quite small, which would give like an elfin pixie type of look if it was exposed and there was no hair. Obviously like my ears are covered up, as are yours. But when the skulls were analysed, it was always noticed that it was offset, the ears, and they had quite large eyes, and with a ridge going down the suture here, and kind of pyramidish at the top of the skull as well. And remarkably, they were quite short. One lady from the north of England was only 4'8", as was some in Stonehenge. That's about the height of Nefertiti. You know, they weren't big people, the ancient Egyptians. We see them as towering above, you know, they look massive and like giants. But when you've got a femur bone, you can easily work out height. It's what, you know, police would do if they found a femur bone and they were trying to ascertain the height and the weight and everything like that. So we know that the males of ancient Britain were probably about 5'2" tops, and the women about 4 feet to 5 feet. So they just seem very small compared to the Bronze Age people, the Beaker culture that came to the British Isles in 2500 BC. Well, they were 6 feet tall. They were a foot taller than the ancient Britons.
And this invading culture, where did they come from?
All across Europe, really. I mean, some DNA testing of late suggests coming right the way down from the steppes in Russia, there was a migrational pattern that was gradual. It didn't happen overnight. That was coming through Europe anyway. Then you had what's believed to be another migration pattern coming down, which was from the Netherlands and more Nordic countries, because we must remember England was only cut off from the mainland Europe in 6,000 years ago. You could have, I mean, it would take you a long time, but you could have walked from London to Norway, but that's Doggerland now. And after the ice caps melted, that became the English Channel, you know, then the North Sea. But prior to that, you could have easily moved around Europe, quite easily.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There are many fantasies connected to these stone circles. For instance, we have this TV series Outlander. I don't, and the books, of course. I don't know if you heard about it or have seen it. Why is that people attribute these, time traveling and all these features to stone circles? Do you have an explanation for that? Is just that our modern fantasy going wild, or is there something to it that we don't know?
Well, again, nothing was written down about prehistory. Nothing. The Druids didn't write anything down. It was all about the conquerors. So there's no real information. We know nothing really about the ancient prehistoric past. So you could put anything you want on it. You could say it was aliens. You could say it was whatever you like. But there is a fascination with the ancient past. And in my own research looking into Stonehenge, I know very reliable sources, military source, they're trained observers for one, who had a time-lapse time missing outside of Stonehenge, about a mile away from, well, about half a mile away from Stonehenge proper, up a track. And they had a time lapse. So you have time lapses associated with some stone circles. Again, I wouldn't say all of them. You know, I mean, that's too sweeping a statement. But I think at the really special big ones, there is something strange, and there is something that can change our consciousness, do something to us. And I think that's the fascination. People go to these places and they do feel a little bit differently. They will go away feeling slightly different. And so that adds to the majestic beauty and poetry and mythologies of the site. And then we have, in our English tradition, loads of stories where, especially from Ireland, the two Arthur de Danann, they were the gods, the tribe of Dana, and they would distort time. So you could go into a mound, if led by the Fae, and the Fae, they're fairies, and fairies traditionally were not nice people. They would abduct children, very much like the aliens, you know, abduction. So the Fae would abduct people, take them into a mound, an ancient prehistoric site, and then the person would come back out and then go to their home. But then it was something like 70 years later. So we've always had in our mythologies these time-lapse incidents to do with supernatural beings, the Fae, and these aren't the cute little fairies of Victorian, you know, artists. These are big people that would go around kidnapping newlywed women for the fairy kings, and they would distort time for you. And we get the word glamour, okay, through the Fae, because they could glamour you and go, come here, eat this food, and then bang, you're in a time lapse. You're trapped in the glamour. Yeah, so that's even where we get words like that from. So I think in the British mythology, we have always had time lapses associated with ancient sites. And in our Celtic mythologies and stories, it all relates to these supernatural beings that are seen. And even around underground water, we have supernatural beings being seen, because long before the story of the Blessed Virgin Mary took over with Marie Bernadette's sighting at Lourdes, where the Blessed Virgin Mary told her to scratch at the ground, and until it all turned to mud, and then the healing waters of Lourdes burst forth. That's what she was guided to do. But before Bernadette said it was the Blessed Virgin Mary, she said she saw a white lady, a white light. Yeah. And all the other children, but the religion took over and said, oh, that must have been the Blessed Virgin Mary. But in other places, in even England and elsewhere in France, before it became the Blessed Virgin Mary, it was this mythical light being of an outline of a woman, curvature. And that's what makes water birth force for healing. So we have another supernatural type of energy associated with underground water, healing, and the goddess manifestation.
Mm. So, in other words, Lourdes also has a specific energy to it, that water there.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. The color that's really high frequency for water is violet or white, what's called like ultra white, and that's the color combination of that water there. For example, if water's got a lot of iron in it, it comes out red. Yeah, and if you've got a lot of copper in water, that would be classified as green. So you can decode earth energies and water energies by using a dowsing aid, or if you know the earth colors, you can do it in your mind. So yeah, that's a really high frequency one. But again, you know, it was this supernatural being, be that the Blessed Virgin Mary or be that the White Lady. A lot of people call it the White Lady, who they believe to be a ghost, but it's a manifestation of the goddess, and one's religion flavors that. You know, whether you say it's a ghost or, you know, a Catholic Blessed Virgin Mary is another thing. So I think, yeah, these places do distort energy fields, and you do get manifestations, and you can get time lapses in these places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that explains it to me. I was always wondering why she took the stone circles as an entry point for time travel. But now it makes sense to me.
Yeah, and it would be mounds, really, if you go to the Celtic mythologies, as more so than the stone circles, because when the gods, Dana, the goddess, tribe of the goddess, they descended into the mounds, the supernatural beings, and then they can open up portals. That's the idea behind it. But the stone circle is enigmatic. It's very picturesque, whereas a mound wouldn't. But they're the gateways, they're the portals, and that's why in Ireland, very up to recent times, actually, that you just couldn't build on a fairy line. They called leys fairy lines. Oh my God, you can't do that. You amputate the fairy line. The fae folk will get us. So that they were very, very superstitious right up until like the 80s, and some people still are, by refusing planning permission because they think they're upset the fae. the supernatural gods and time portals, people start going missing. That's their reality of place.
Mm-hmm. Is there one place that you would like to go that you have not seen up to now?
The one place I would like to go, well, I haven't been to Easter Island, so I think I'd like to go to Easter Island. And I would like to go to somewhere natural as well, like to explore the Aboriginal Australia, because I think they're the wisdom keepers. I think the indigenous peoples that still walk the land, some of them still do, a lot don't. I think we could learn an awful lot from the natural wisdom keepers.
Yeah. And what else? The natural wisdom keepers, and what else could we learn from the ancients that would be very beneficial for us? Because right now everything is upside down, everything is in turmoil, and people do not know who they are and where they come from and where they are going. And I think that the ancients have to tell us a lot. What is your idea about that?
Well, the ancients knew the energies to live above domestically. For health and wealth and long-being, longevity rather. So the energies they built above were different to sacred site temple energies, and so we know that, through research. But also particular global crossing points of particular global grids. Imagine like an X, two lines crossing. Well, one global grid discovered by a German physicist in the 1980s that was explored by Dowsers and other people thereafter, realized that relates to communication skills. And they found that the pulpit, where the vicar speaks from in traditional church settings, could allow better communication, the so-called word of God. If we could learn anything from the ancients, well, if that enhances communication, I would love to see a school, if that has that crossing point there, because it's a wide grid, it may or may not have it there, but if it does have it there, well, then that would be a wonderful place for dyslexic children, people with stammers. If you have a high energy circular pattern, which some stone circles were cited above, that's rejuvenating. That will give you physical energy. Well, then let's have part of a hospital that you would go into after, you want to recuperate, and let's put you into that energy zone. At the same time, it was being known since the 1930s that detrimental energies, such as groundwater, inhibits growth, no matter if it's a plant, an animal, or a human, and they're called cancer houses. So we could know where not to live or how to diffuse it if we live there. Then when it came to the discovery in the 1950s of the Curry net by Dr. Ernest Curry in the 1950s, who found that if you lived above you slept above rather the crossing point of the Curry net, then long-term exposure will lead to cancers. And another study showed that a third of our hospital admissions over a period of time was that they were there because of geopathic stress, which is living above toxic earth energies. So if we are going to learn anything about the ancients, we can learn to live in harmony with Gaia. And once we're living in harmony with Gaia, then I truly believe that if you're not living above toxic earth energies to make you aggravated and agitated, then the community will be more in harmony. And I've doused a lot of domestic settings. I don't just douse sacred sites. I've doused numerous domestic settings, and they are above very gentle yet harmonic energy.
Yeah, that is so true. We have no idea what we are doing. Yeah, maybe some people do, but they do it anyway, and a lot of that is really detrimental to our health, to our well-being, and all these ideas are ridiculed and yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I think we can look back and we can ascertain what the ancients were up to, and we can say they, at one point, they were living in harmony. It wasn't always like that. You did have certain wars and things as evidence for that. But if we go back to the communal way of living, the we instead of the I of the later Bronze Age, and land ownership, and everything was then a kingship or a queenship, rather than a collective sharing. I think, again, we can learn from that. But I think that the fundamentals are living in harmony with Gaia, more so now than ever, because of, you know, what we have done to her by just, you know, exploiting. That has to stop. And one thing I would like to think lockdown has shown some of us is that we don't need to go shopping so much. We don't need stuff. You know, and we can live quite happily with what we have rather than what we want all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm somebody, I hate to go shopping. So I can, if you really want to make me mad, tell me to go shopping the entire day.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, some people don't like you, but a lot of people are consumer. I mean, you're probably quite you know, quite aware person that is, you know, a bit more awake than some of our younger brothers and sisters out there that are, you know, snoring and fast asleep.
To me, it has come to a point where, you know, once in a while, okay, I also need something, let's say a blouse, pants, or whatever. And but I don't have the patience, let's say, for waiting. I usually do not enter any cabin to try it on. I just grab it. Might fit. And then if there are more than 3 people at the cashiers in front of me, I hang it back and go away. That is how much I hate to be in these shopping centers or whatever it is. I just hate it.
Wow, yeah, it can be a bit hustly bustly, like a bit like an airport. You know, they get hustly and bustly, don't they? And you're in everybody's auric field, and you know, oof.
Yeah. So Maria, I thank you so much for coming. And that was really interesting. I would like to have you back one day if you are.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. That'd be lovely. I'd love to have a talk with you again. It's been wonderful, and thanks for having me on your show. And you send me a link and we can share, and that'll be lovely as well.
Yeah, of course. I will send you the original Zoom link, and then if you want, you can upload it to your channel.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. That'd be wonderful.
I will do that.
Okay then.
Okay, that was it. Night Flight for today with the wonderful Maria Wheatley. And we see you next time. Have a good day and take good care of yourself. Bye-bye.